Good afternoon, folks. It's Tuesday, the 21st of January. I normally don't post much less responses, but updates to chains of or series of videos. But I thought this might be but I'd considered for some time while I was working on the whole series of adding a final-ish, conclusionary, if I may use the word, series of thoughts and context, I guess, for my series of videos on the use of the Neapolitan sixth chord and the golden mean, and how they appear in certain few, and again, few, very few. I looked at very few of Prokofiev's shorter piano works, and how they sort of reflect sort of certain general trends in Russian theoretical and compositional circles in the late 19th and early 20th century. And I'm particularly grateful for all the attention that my recent videos have been getting on this subject. It's always good that people are looking, and always good that holding different opinions, and different opinions are always very, very good things to have. And so I say thank you for that. And but anyway, I thought maybe it might be worthwhile, sort of as a summing up kind of thing, to sort of say a few more things. Now, my search was based on looking for interesting uses of Neapolitan chords in Prokofiev's shorter piano works, for the simple reason that I happened to come across a copy of the Dover score of his shorter piano works at a local used bookstore. Shout out to, by the way, and I usually don't include blatant advertising, but I shout out to Half Price Books in general, and the Countryside, Illinois branch or franchise, or whatever they would call themselves, particularly because that's where I found it. And looking through these, I happened to notice some things that, and again, just quite looking, sort of interesting. In the Opus 3, number 4, the Opus 62, number 1, the Opus 62, number 12, as well as the two movements that I looked at last time, from the Opus 12 and Opus 17. Those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces seem to have some interesting things, interesting Neapolitanisms, or whatever you want to call it. And again, I'm sorry if I'm inventing new words, but sorry. And found these to be interesting and worth thinking about. But I also, while I was doing this, I also looked for precedents in older works of other composers whom Prokofiev would have known, both just sort of generally, as well as a performing concert pianist, who was, after all, part of what he wanted to do for his principal gig was to play concerts of his own music, particularly his piano music, since he himself was also a very good concert pianist. And so it would make sense that he would stock these programs with things that people tended to want to hear anyway. For example, the Beethoven sonatas, as well as other works by other composers, particularly Chopin. And as we know, that there are interesting uses of Neapolitan relationships. I'm sorry if that's not the right word, not the right term. The Neapolitanisms, shall we say, in both Chopin and Beethoven's repertoire. And I looked particularly as I was doing this. I also sort of did a little bit of general reading. I looked for and asked about specific works of Beethoven, particularly that Prokofiev would have known and discovered in various sources of my own reading. Particularly Harlow Robinson's Prokofiev biography, a copy of which was in the Downers Grove Library for years and years and years. And I would go past this thing. I said, I really should read that at some point, and then finally did, which led to this whole unfortunate series of events that take place in these videos. I also looked through the Grove's Dictionary of Music Musicians, just for some just for additional context. And I also had some contact in the form of an email from a Professor Simon Morrison at Princeton University, whom I basically asked about, what do we know, what Beethoven sonatas would Prokofiev have known, and when, and who would have taught him, etc., etc. And I kind of, through those searches, I think it's probably quite safe to assume that Prokofiev knew all of the sonatas. He probably had at least looked at them and probably read through most, if not all of them, during his lifetime. Although I can't say for sure because I don't know. I didn't ask him. And I can't exactly ask him about a bunch of this stuff. But chances are he looked at most, if not all of them, seriously. But it seems from my searches that the Opus 2 number 1 and the Opus 2 number 3, Opus 22, Opus 27 number 2, Opus 101 and Opus 106 and Opus 111 particularly were of interest to and we have documented evidence that Prokofiev worked with these things and played them and knew them, both probably as a composer as well as a performer. And of course, the Opus 106 is also known as the Hammerklavier. And this is and I also should note that of the Opus 2 number 3, the C major one, I think this was back in his student days, Prokofiev produced an orchestration of at least part, if not all, of that sonata. So we have here already from this, we've discovered two things that I think are important. Number one, a knowledge of at least some, if not all, of the Beethoven sonatas in varying degrees and details, depending on the one you're talking about. And also the conscious revision of at least one of them in the form of an orchestration of the Opus 2 number 3 in C major. So there was a revision. He revised that from a piano sonata medium into an orchestration of some sort. Now, I have not seen this orchestration. If anybody knows about it, knows where I could get a copy of it, I would be very grateful if I could. But also, the Hammerklavier also struck my interest, and I actually am also part of this. I read through these myself, or listened through them. I ain't no pianist. I listened through them and looked at the score. And it's very interesting to note that there are certain Neapolitanisms in the first movement of the Hammerklavier, Opus 106, which of course is in B-flat major, that I thought were really kind of interesting, especially having to do with the minor Neapolitanisms that I kind of talked a little bit about in my last video. And again, I would tell you again that was all sort of musings and speculation and thinking about, and I don't know whether he thought of this or not. I don't know, and I never said that I knew, right? These are simply They're simply reactions, or simply things that occurred to me while I was working on this project. There are several places in the first movement of the Hammerklavier Sonata where the key signature goes from a home key of 2 flats to both 2 sharps and 5 sharps. And there is one passage where the first appearance of the B minor key signature has a D sharp, prominent D sharps in it. So that's and that again is, of course, B is C flat enharmonically, and the first thing that he does is enharmonically. Enharmonically, he's alluding to C flat minor because of that. Mind you, there's a raised third in that, so we got a major Neapolitan with a minor Neapolitan implied area there, which is kind of interesting. And then later, there's a place where, at least one place, where there's a 5 sharps, which of course B major, which of course is the major C flat major enharmonically respelled. So, and that's also kind of interesting. But so those two things, sort of there are kinds of enharmonic respellings, and probably due to the fact that it's a lot easier to read 2 sharps or 5 sharps than it is God knows how many flats and double flats. Those things are really hard to read, and it's a lot easier to read sharp keys with no double accidentals in them. Mind you, it's very interesting to note that in the recapitulation of the first movement of the Hammerklavier Sonata, there are several appearances of the following pitches: C flat, E double flat, and G flat as a triad. And again, this I haven't really looked, I haven't really seriously analyzed this whole thing yet to see, well, are these really collections of non-chord tones, etc., etc. I mean, at this point, I'm just not sure. However, there on the page, C flat, E double flat, G flat, which is, if you analyze it in B flat major, that is the minor form of the flat 2 chord. Flat 2 minor, or, dare I say it, the Neapolitan minor. Right? So it is there. It is there. So, and I found that to be quite interesting, and it was one of the reasons why I kind of thought to myself, well, maybe I'm not totally off the beam here, since we know that Prokofiev revised at least one other sonata by literally writing it down, perhaps somehow, either intuitively, either maybe writing it down. I don't know. I simply don't know. Maybe this kind of minor Neapolitanism might have influenced some of what he was doing with, not among other pieces, which I, again, haven't looked at in any detail. Maybe there's this implied minor Neapolitanism, if that's an acceptable term, might have arisen when Prokofiev was thinking to himself, that's sort of an interesting, an interesting thing. Well, what could I do with that myself? So I think that's really quite fascinating. And I also wanted to point out that at the end of Opus 62, number 1, the first of the 2 thoughts for solo piano, the last harmony, the key signature of the whole piece is is 2 sharps, and it's got a good strong D tonality to it in a lot of ways. Mind you, there are some interesting Neapolitanisms in that one as well. But the last chord, and again, this is purely speculation. This is purely speculation. Can't say one way or another. I don't know. But it's purely speculation on my part that the last few notes, sustained notes, in that chord, the final chord, has the following note. Have the following note: B flat, D, and F, and B natural, D, and F sharp. So around a central D, you have B flat, B, F, and F sharp. And harmonically, B flat and its minor Neapolitan. Now, and again, like I said before, there are some interesting Neapolitan relationships in that piece, which I invite people to go back and take a look at. But at the same time, and that sort of struck me as rather interesting. And again, I don't know, but that sort of rung sort of a bell for me. So coupled with what I saw in the opus in the rest of Prokofiev's output, what little I've seen of it, this seemed interesting. So reworking and reuse of materials, seems to be implied here, at least with the orchestration, right? And a revision and an extension, or an abstraction, or an exaggeration, or in a way a kind, which is what sarcasms, hey, see how I worked that in there, is all about. Maybe this might be something. This might be something worth thinking to. And I want to close a little bit with the sort of general context in terms of musical history. It is not without precedent for things that had been around in music and used particular ways in music to at one point or another become used in a totally different fashion. And I can think of at least two examples. When you take one note from each of the two whole tone scales, the whole tone scales having the advantage of that they suspend any feeling of tonality, but since they're only two forms, you can't get much material out of it. If you take those two notes and switch them around, you generate a 12-note row with 48 forms, both retrograde, prime, inversion, and retrograde inversion, that suspend tonality quite well, which we've talked about, and which I've talked about, and probably bored people to death with, talking about this, which is basically what happened with Schoenberg's devising of the Opus 26 quintet's row. It's a huge 40-minute piece based on a whole tone-like thing, but is a tone row that keeps the advantages, right? But gets rid of the disadvantages. So whole tone scales had been around for a long time, but at one point in the 20s, somebody came to, I wonder if we do something like that. What would be the implication? What could I get out of that? And also, it's also important to keep in mind, and also a little later, that this kind of revision or misprision, which means a kind of willful taking a miss, as Harold Bloom in his map of misreading and the anxiety of influence talks about this, is that there is a willful reinterpretation or reuse or something that hadn't been done in quite the same way before, right? That same kind of thing happened later in the 20th century when integral serialism developed out of observations based on the music of Weber. So it's reuse in a different way that people might not have thought of before. And I think it's whether or not Webern would have been able to grasp what the integral serialists were doing with his music. That may be that maybe he might, maybe he mightn't, and maybe if Prokofiev didn't, if he'd seen what I did, if talking, well, it's sort of I hadn't really thought about that. That's interesting. Well, whatever. So, and again, that this is that this is largely speculation and conjecture. However, the speculation and conjecture, which I never said was anything but speculation and conjecture, is based a little bit, anyway, on some reading, on some looking, and some thinking, and some prior research experience of my own. So that's how I came to this, and I hope that's a, and please understand that this is not an apology. I don't apologize for anything here. I am simply providing additional context, and I hope it was helpful. And I'll leave you with one thing. Okay, so maybe the minor Neapolitan hasn't been used very much, if at all. But, who knows? Maybe somewhere someone might have. I mean, I certainly don't know. I certainly don't know the entire vast spectrum of tonal music. I don't. Maybe somebody has. Maybe nobody has. But nevertheless, I mean, something like this, say in the key of A minor, and again, I'm not a pianist, but something like this might be interesting. Doing something like this. That might be sort of an interesting progression that maybe someone might have already used, or somebody could use in the future. Who knows? I don't know. But it's fun to think about. Yeah. Reuse. Revision. Yeah. Instead of, I can't do that, that's all wrong, which is not constructive. Anyhow, more thoughts, hopefully decent context, more stuff to think about. Yeah, more stuff. Stuff. There's that word again.